Hello, I'm here with my friend. I'm so happy to call her my friend, Bobbi Bidochka, and she lives in the intersection of finance, entrepreneur, and science. Bobbi, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, Bobby, can you just take 2 minutes to tell us a little bit about your background? I mean, I have read your CV several times and I still don't understand it because you have so many things going on. But I know that you are involved into venture capitalism. You are dealing a lot with universities, discovering new things, science. But it's a whole chicken soup with letter soup with a lot of acronyms, and I really don't understand what's going on. Can you tell me what's going on in your profession?
Yes, you're not alone, Alan. So it's definitely a valid question. Yes, so I do work for Tandem Launch. They're a tech incubator and VC firm. We start deep tech companies, and so I do look for tech entrepreneurs as well as helping some of our portfolio companies to raise venture capital. Also, I have Imagine Ideation, which is my business, and that is a company that basically we help people move their ideas forward through various mechanisms, events, meetings, communication strategies, or sometimes we help people fundraise also, like all different kinds of ways, just customized approaches. And then, of course, I'm an author. So as you know, I'm going to have my book coming out, Sexual Intelligence in Business, sometime in January. And yeah, I mean, those are the big things. But coming out of when I was at McGill, I co-founded an initiative called Win for Science, which is it's a women's initiative for science, sort of 4 pillars of action. And it was because we definitely identified that there was a lack of women remaining in academia. And so what we did is through the support of the Department of Pharmacology and Therapeutics, Dr. Lisa Munter and I set forth to research why this was happening, what is the problem, and what can we do to solve those problems. And so in doing so, I read a ton, stacks and stacks of research. This is a highly researched topic, so there was no shortage of good information to find. Just a matter of collecting it and putting it together, and forming that into some kind of strategy that we could try to tackle that, at least at McGill. And so, what we learned is that in the life sciences, the health sciences, there has been more than 50% more than adequate enrollment of women in universities. In fact, it's kind of like it's incrementally growing each year. And they stay also up into the PhD and postdoc level. And so enrollment is not the issue, and interest in the area is not the issue. Specific to life science and health sciences, it also happens to hit. There's like a decision to be made when you're a PhD and postdoc. Do I stay in academia or do I go in industry? Sort of what do I do with my life, my career? And then they have what's called a leaky pipeline, which is that's when all of a sudden women just start dropping out right there. In this particular area of research, it happens at that point in time, happens to hit around marriage and baby time, which has been put off later in life. Back 30, 40 years ago, women were having families much younger, but marriage and children tends to be put off into the 30s now. And so that is one of many aspects as to why all of a sudden women sort of make this choice. Like, I don't think I can do, because being an academic is not a job, it is a lifestyle. Like, it really is all encompassing. It's a demanding position, and it's very hard to manage an academic career and also it's not impossible, but depending on this type of support system that you have in place, it can be very challenging. And so a lot of women end up just choosing to get a job in industry instead, because it's more stable than it is a job, a 9-to-5, and then it's easier to manage. Not all, but some. And so that was one of an indicator of an issue that we were trying to tackle. And then there's also a lack of mentorship and a lack of role models. So that has very implicit implications, because it's not something that women really like consciously say to myself, well, hey, I don't see a role model for myself and therefore I'm going to leave academia. It doesn't quite happen like that. It's just like over time you start to not see yourself there because you don't relate to anybody there. So something is sort of in the background happening. And it is a bit discouraging when you're only having mostly male mentors, and especially right now in a post-Me Too era, having a male mentor is more complicated because you cannot just go for beers like the guys do, right? And so trying to structure mentorship that is in a way fair and equal to your male counterparts is also a bit of a challenge, and therefore it does get a bit, you sort of feel like, well, I'm not getting the same level of mentorship from my supervisor as the other male lab members because of, you know, various reasons. And so there's that. So there's a lack of mentorship, there's a lack of role models. And then there's also just basically like full-on explicit bias. So also in the hiring processes, women, I mean, everybody knows about that Yale study where one male and one female, or the same CV, they just changed the names and gave it to a whole bunch of people. And of course the women were rated lower and all of that. And so it's just, and I have actually sat in on academic recruitment meetings, and it's just there. And it's not like, you know, any of the men are like, hey, she's a woman, let's not hire her. It's just, there's just this lens that people look through, that they're looking for qualities of men that aren't necessarily reflected in women's CVs. And then there's also, you know, when women do try to attempt to be in academia or stay in science, they do have a family, even though you know, the institutions, the funding institutions and the universities have put in place policies like, you know, we give you a grace year for your grant, we give you grace year for publications and all this because you're on maternity. Almost no female scientists take the full maternity because A, they don't want to because they love what they do, and B, it's just like they can't because you're never going to get that time back. Even if you get this grant, this grace and whatever, it's that year, that 6 months is lost forever. So you're always, and it's never, what people also realize, it's not just about like the maternity year, because raising children is ongoing. It doesn't stop after that first year. So you're always having to leave early to pick up the daycare, the doctor's appointments, you know, all of this. And just the burden of duty tends to fall more on women than men. Even when the married couple are both scientists, it still tends to fall, you know, the domestic and the child rearing on the women. So you just can't get that time back. So the CV, it's never they can never catch up. So they're always going to be, so with that, when you're in a recruitment situation, trying to go for some kind of academic position, the women are always going to look like they're less qualified because they cannot catch up beyond that. So there's just like all of these things that, there's microaggressions, there's explicit bias, there's imposter syndrome. So all of these other it's like just picking away, like each one of them, if you just took it individually, okay, let's try to tackle that one thing. But if you just imagine taking a piece of paper and just making a dot and a dot and a dot and a dot and a dot, and each dot itself is something small, but once you've had thousands of them, you have this big thing in front of you. And so, and yet in medicine, comparatively, there are more women who are in medicine. The hours are longer in medicine, and on average, women in medicine have more children than women in life sciences. And so it's like, okay, well, why is that? Because, so then some of the research suggests that women tend to choose careers that are more human-centric, which is why some people, that's how they explain the lack of women in STEM. I mean, it's very like, it's a pipeline issue, right? So you want to get kids very, very young, imagining, like when you go, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, ask kids in elementary school who are around 10 years old, like, what does a scientist look like? Like they always imagine like an Albert Einstein, or what does a doctor look like? It's a male in a jacket. So they're already sort of getting programmed to which areas that they don't even realize that, like I said, it's not conscious, like, oh, I never see any women doctors, therefore I'm not going to be one. It doesn't go like that. They just end up gravitating towards, things that where there's like a sense of belonging. And so there are studies that suggest that women choose careers that are more humanities related, more human related. That's why medicine, they tend to stick around in medicine, because there's something about the patient relationship and the helping aspect, as opposed to an engineering or a mathematics career, where this is basically like just you and the computer, right? Or you and the machine, where there's less human interaction necessarily. So that does tend to explain why also, women gravitate towards certain careers and roles, and why they don't. I'm not fully into that. Like I subscribe to that only because of social conditioning. And I think that if we didn't condition children to sort of separate those two things, then I foresee that we'll see some changes over time as we encourage more women and more girls to go into engineering and the hard sciences and those types of fields. But also, like, historically, those fields are higher valued. That's why women also, there's this pay inequity issue, because a doctor is more valued than a nurse, even though they actually have nearly equitable amount of education. And the dirty work is really done by the nurses, but it is valued. It's about the value doctors get higher paid. Engineers are valued. There's certain things that society values, and that's why those roles are occupied by men, and that's why those roles are higher paid. So it is changing now, but this does also explain a lot of the equity, inequity, the pay equity issues. More women work in hospitality and different types of sectors, whereas men work more in business and finance, and historically anyways.
Wow. So you mentioned that it was a career in science is a lifestyle. It's not a job that you can just check out at 5 o'clock. Can you give us more detail on to what is it required? How is it a lifestyle? How is it that you have to be in there longer hours, I assume, or always on the go?
Mm-hmm. It's very similar to entrepreneurship in a way, because at most universities, the academics do get paid a salary, but what funds their lab and their research is grants. And so, much like an entrepreneur always sort of chasing VC money or revenue, they also are constantly chasing the money. And this is doing research, especially in science and in medicine, is slow. And it's slow because you can only make cells grow in a petri dish so fast. Like, nature has its own timeline. And so, the trajectory of a successful academic career takes a long time, because science takes a long time to come up with results. And so also you have to manage a lab. So it's like managing staff, and your lab is also a teaching area, and academics are also required to teach. So they have to teach classes, and it's not just showing up to the class, right? Curriculum needs to get constructed, and that curriculum evolves over time. And so depending on which classes you're teaching, and some people teach sort of like the same kind of classes for like their whole career, and others don't. They change classes, or they depending on latest results, you sort of have to switch. The content evolves also as science evolves and new discoveries are made. You also have to do a ton of committee work at the university. There's universities are essentially run by academics. And so that involves a lot of academic time involvement on committees and subcommittees and all sorts of things. You also have to do committee and organizational conference work outside the university. Scientific conferences have to get organized, and those are run by academics as well, usually. And then there's publishing. It's a publish or perish type of sort of cycle. You have to do your research in order to get results, in order to be able to write a publication that gets accepted to a journal. And this process is long and ongoing, like writing academic papers, reviewing other people's academic, because they're all peer reviewed. So you're doing yours and you're reading others and you're participating on other committees for academic journals. It's a lot, and you cannot accomplish this just 9 to 5. And sometimes science just doesn't wait, right? Like if you're running an experiment, the science doesn't care that it's 5 o'clock, right? You have to continue. If you don't, there's a timing thing. What you see around the university in the science departments is a lot of the students or the researchers have little timers on them, because they have to run back to whatever it is they're doing. You have to get back for that experiment, because it's time sensitive to take it to the next stage. And so science doesn't wait for dinner. Science doesn't care that you need sleep.
Wow.
And so it's just, it's like running a business. It's not 9 to 5. It just isn't. And you have to grants are exhaustive. The publications are, and the process of, it's not just writing it, the process of writing it and submitting it and getting it back and reviewing and making revisions and then back again. And it's a lot.
So what are some solutions in order to have more of a playing field, men versus women? Let's say we determine that what we would like to have is some kind of income equality. We would like a woman with a PhD in X to be more or less equivalent to a man with the same qualifications.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you just mentioned all the hurdles, all the reasons why that's not happening, but still from the outside we see it as an injustice. How come Joe Blow is earning 100,000 and Jane is only earning 75,000?
Well, a lot of universities, McGill included, I can speak to McGill because it's very because I know it, they have a pay equity exercise that they go through every couple of years. So they evaluate all the salaries, and they literally bump up the women's salaries to be equal. But what happens is then all the rest of that still keeps picking away at it. Plus, women are historically reluctant to go ask for pay raises. And so, but men, they ask. They don't just ask, they demand. And they get them, and they fight for them, and they're relentless. And so, and women won't do that. A lot of women won't do that. Not all women, a lot of women won't do that. And so that's why every couple of years, they have to keep doing it, because the men keep asking for raises and demanding. And then also the women, depending on what they're doing, especially if they have families, they can't advance as fast as the men in their science and in their publications and in their research. And so then again, as the men build their case for their raises and get more grant money, because men also, so there's a bias towards women in grant award amounts. So women get less grants than men for equal science. But it's also because the women are a little bit behind, then the men tend to get higher grants, bigger grants, more grants. And then that gives them that leg to stand on when they go ask for their raise from the dean. It's like, but look at all that I'm doing, so I deserve a raise. And so that keeps happening. So there are definitely institutions that are tackling that in the best way that they can't force women to go ask for raises. But with Win for Science and other initiatives, women are now becoming more aware of it, where we were offering different types of training and speakers to encourage women, listen, you have to go ask, and here's how you do it. And here's when you do it. And here's how to tackle imposter syndrome. So people who don't know what imposter syndrome is, like that little voice in your head that says, I'm a fraud and I'm not good enough, and all of that. So then we give them strategies on how to cope with that. I mean, men have it too, just women are a little bit more prevalent right now. And then also educating everybody. So we had several speakers and presentations on what is implicit and explicit bias. So educating everybody, especially, it's one thing to preach to the choir amongst the women. It's like, yeah, we already know this stuff. It's sort of the upper echelons of men who need to hear that. And so, McGill has mandatory equity training and how to run a recruitment effort that's less bias. They have rules in place, like there has to be a certain amount of women in your recruitment pool. You have to be hiring a certain amount. You have to promote a certain amount. So like McGill and other institutions definitely have that in place for all of these reasons to try to tackle that. So it is getting tackled. But they're still at the, the individual and the society level, which takes a bit longer to do. There's lots of advocacy groups and undergrad groups at universities going and talking to high school kids about, women in science, and, men can be nurses, women can be doctors, and all of this. So it's all happening. It's not an overnight fix. So,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. So if as a society, we continue evolving. Where we are today is much better than where we were 100 years ago. And obviously, with that same line of thought, you can think that in 100 years, we could be in a much equal society. So I hope it's not going to take 100 years, but if
Yeah.
you if you had to put some kind of timeline, like when can we see that people are more or less in equal footing, and whatever discrepancy in salary is because of a choice that a person made on their lifestyle and not because of inequities in the system?
A timeline is hard. I think it would be interesting because like I said, there's a lot of advocacy and groups trying to build the pipeline early, right? So I think what will be interesting is just to take a look at what happens over the next 30 years, to see if those efforts, in what ways that those efforts make a difference in changing people's perspective on the types of careers that they choose. And so definitely there's people waiting and watching and collecting data over time. I mean, there will never be really a time that's 50-50. Theoretically, we should be like fluctuating, right? Where it just kind of goes kind of randomly up and down and up and down. I mean, what you don't want is to swing the other way and go where all the leaders are women and all, like, you know what I mean? So the magic is in the diversity. That's when all the good stuff happens. So you want to be able to get to a point where we are all naturally creating diverse environments without, like, it's intentional now, right? So there's a bit of a reasonable accommodation effort. People don't like that term because it's a bit antiquated, but we do sort of have to pop women up and give them the role, even though maybe they're less qualified, because they will do well anyways. And so just to start placing women, to start normalizing that. And then over time, it should be off the table. Like theoretically, in 30 to 40 years, the topic should be off the table. Right. In Western society, that is. We have to remember that there are lots of other societies and countries in the world that have different issues that they're grappling with right now, other than, university salaries.
Right. Okay. So in that thought, we are talking from the perspective of United States and Canada. Are there any countries that are more advanced in this social equality?
Well, definitely the Nordic countries in Europe. I mean, they're to say they're more advanced is a bit of a, that's a bit of an uncomfortable term as well, but they're doing better for sure. They have stricter laws, I guess you could say, that are broad based and not just say sector specific. about pay equity, for example. You know, they have a different mindset there about less. I mean, they're still capitalism, but they're sort of like this very nice blend of community and capitalism as a culture. And so yeah, they're doing a bit better in terms of you know, women's equity and environmental type of initiatives and things like that. I can't speak to other issues that are maybe more racial or you know, sexual in nature. I don't know what's going on there, but yeah, if as an example, they're doing. I would say they're leaders in in that area.
Perfect. Well, Bobbi, I think you answered all my questions. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. My pleasure.